All right. I'd
That's
like to
too
call
bad.
the meeting of the Budget Review
it isn't.
Committee to order. It's Monday, April 2nd, 2018 at 7 PM, and we're in the Aldermanic Chamber. Would the clerk please call the roll?
Alderman at Large Larry Wilshire. Here. Alderman at Large Brian McCarthy is absent. Alderman at Large Michael O'Brien is present. Alderman at Large David Tenza. Here. Alderwoman at Large Shoshana Kelly. Here. Alderman Jan Smith.
Here.
Okay. Also in attendance, Mr. Chairman, is the chairman is present.
Thank you.
But also in attendance, Mr. Chairman, is Mayor Donches, Alderman Jettie, and Mr. Catagone, if I said the name correctly.
Okay. Just for the person taking the minutes, they still haven't corrected. They have me as Alderman at Large. I'm not Alderman at Large. Okay. Public comment?
Chairman,
Yes.
Alderman Clee is also present.
Oh, excuse me, Alderman Clee, excuse me.
Okay. All right. So public comment, there's no members of the public here. Oh, and the president has arrived.
Oh, okay. Mhm.
Communications,
There are none?
new business,
There is none.
unfinished business.
There is none. Mr. Chairman, I would like to make a motion to take from the table R 18019.
Okay, the motion on the floor is to take from the table R 18019, which is the budget. Any discussion? All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, motion carries. Before we get started, the mayor is asked to come forward and give us some words on the budget, if no one has any objections.
Don't know yet, I haven't heard the words.
No, it has to be
Can we
before,
object
not
after
after.
the fact?
Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I've not had a chance to come into the Budget Committee to kind of give my, like, a little bit of an overview about what's there. And I discussed it a little bit at the time the budget was introduced, but no one had looked at the budget at that time. And so given that tonight is a bit of a light night in terms of the number of departments you have to review, I thought tonight would be a good time to come in. I thought first I would sort of give you a little of the context over the last few years, which still play out this year. The budget for last year, which was fiscal 18, was a difficult one because we had increases in fixed costs that were very significant, principally in three areas. Number one, the state imposed increase in the pension obligation, which was a $2 million increase as a result of a adjustment in the assumed rate of return at the pension system. So that was $2 million. The healthcare costs for city employees rose $3.6 million, which was over 10%. That, of course, was a big factor. And in addition to that, Penachuk's fees went up $360,000, 12% or so. So those three items together caused the budget to go up around $6 million. Partially in response to that, and the way that was dealt with was we tried to keep the budget tight, and when the surplus came in at the end of the year, which was comprised of unappropriated funds, unexpended but appropriated funds, as well as revenue which exceeded the amounts projected in the budget, in order to keep the tax rate to a more reasonable level, given all these fixed cost increases plus everything else that was going on in the budget, we applied $7.1 million to the tax rate to keep it down. Now, that is more than we usually do, but the budget was more problematic than usual. That helped us keep the tax rate at a reasonable level, which was 2.88%, despite these major increases in costs. But looking forward to this year, we realize that we're not likely to be able to apply $7.1 million to the tax rate because we may not have that. And we may be applying a more typical amount of $4.5 or $5 million, which is kind of the ballpark that has been the case over the past few years. So with that in mind, I wanted to make sure that we had a very careful budget, and therefore, at a very early stage, last fall, asked the departments to submit kind of preliminary maintenance budgets, meaning what would it cost just to maintain current services. And we got budgets from all of the departments probably in the November to December time frame, which reflected the maintenance case. And we began studying the budget situation at that time, and in part using those budgets, we came out with a set of guidelines which we gave to the departments. Now, I was going to get a little bit into the change that was made with respect to the wastewater, but maybe I won't do that at the moment. In any event, so at the time we got the maintenance budgets, and they were very preliminary, so we told people that they would not be bound by these budgets, but the fire department came in at about 2.5 in the maintenance preliminary budget. The police department at about 3.0 in terms of percent of increase, and the school department sent in 2.1. Now, the school department's budget was sent by Dan Donovan, who's a financial guy, I think without consulting extensively, and we told them it was very preliminary, but without consulting at least extensively with Superintendent Mosley. And also, I think it assumed that there would be savings realized as a result of privatization of the custodial force, so some unrealistically low custodial numbers in that budget. In any event, as then in the January-February timeframe, we asked that more permanent or actual budgets, proposed budgets, be given to us by each of the departments. And at that point, we got the budgets pretty much that you see now in the book. We got initially 2.5 from the fire department. Then after the lawsuit was resolved and the court suggested or ruled that the cap is not enforceable, the fire department added to their request additional personnel in the area of dispatch, I think 4 additional employees above the 2.5%. The police kind of stayed where they were, and the school department, after working more on the budget, submitted a budget of 3.4, which was voted on, which was that was the superintendent's budget, and the superintendent's budget was approved last Thursday, I think, by the school department. Now, for 2 reasons, for a few reasons, I have reduced all 3 of those major budgets to 2.5% increases. First, because even when we were hoping that we would not need to proceed with a revaluation and that we would get some latitude by DRA, the Department of Revenue Administration, we wanted to make sure that the tax rate this year would be modest, definitely under 3%. And to accomplish that, we needed to keep these budgets at, as we proposed them, at about 2.5, because we worked out like all of the, you can work out in advance that the budget is X and the tax base grows a little bit and we apply so much to the tax rate, you can work out what the tax rate's going to be in the fall. So projecting all that out, we figured, well, if we keep everything to 2.5 and so many of the other departments below that, and if we make kind of significant savings elsewhere and bring the budget in at a 1.6% increase, which is what this is, we can make sure that the tax rate is under 3%, despite the fact that we won't have 7.1 million to buy down the tax rate this fall. So for that reason, the tax rate, we wanted to propose a budget that did not go up very much, which we did, 1.6%. Now, in addition to that, of course, now we face the revaluation issue, and as we've discussed in some detail at upstairs and since, at the special meeting and since, it appears that there may be a shift to some degree of the tax burden citywide from commercial onto residential because of the large degree to which residential homes have increased in value over the last 5 years. So for that reason, too, in order to mitigate, reduce, lessen the impact of this revaluation on residential property taxpayers, I believed that it was I believed and believe that it was also necessary to come in with a very tight budget to assure people that we're doing everything we can to mitigate the effect, to reduce the effect of this possible shift in burden from commercial onto residential. So what you have before you, and I thought I would just show you where some of this is occurring. On page 253 is the kind of the end of the school budget, and you see there a $975,000 reduction. And what that does is it reduces the 3.4% requested by the school department down to 2.5%. Now, this is a 2.5% increase on the base core school department budget. The benefits for pensions and for health care are considered separately because although you see them incorporated in the budget of the school department here, we usually focus on this core services budget because the school department and its employees do not really have control over pensions or health care costs. So we ultimately put those into the budget, but when we were talking about a 2.5% increase, it was without considering at all the benefits, the increases in health care and in pensions. Anyway, so what the reduction there achieves, that $975,000, a total budget of $146,672,000, which at least with respect to the core budget that I spoke about is a 2.5% increase. The fire department is on page 153. That's the end of the fire department budget. And you see there a cut in the amount of $133,000. Now, what that basically does is it removes the 4 additional dispatchers, which were proposed as additional personnel sort of over and above their base maintenance service budget of 2.5%. And the reason I did that is for the reasons that I said. I thought we needed to hold these major departments to 2.5%. We are functioning with the dispatchers we have now. Probably would be better to have more, but the question is, can those be afforded? And certainly with an extra $133,000, we would be nowhere near a 2.5% increase in the core budget of the fire department. So that would eliminate the new positions, but maintain current level of services that we have at the present time. The police department appears on page, the last page of the police department appears on page 144. And you see at the bottom there an adjustment of around $95,000 on the police department budget. Now, again, what that does is it takes the core budget. What it does is it will mean that the core budget, excluding, again, healthcare and pensions, would, with that reduction, be increased by 2.5%. Now, the police department perspective is, and when you get into the detail of the police department budget, you will find that most everything is basically the same level as it was last year, except for payroll. Now, they have no contract for the fiscal year beginning on July 1st. Contract runs out on June 30. And I think that, and you can get into what the various contracts have been over the years, but I think that a 3% increase, the assumption that we will always give police officers a 3% increase no matter what, maybe is more than we can afford in the long run. And they did get 4 years of 3% in the last contract, so this would increase their budget 2.5%. Mostly for payroll instead of 3. Other things that I was maybe going to, I thought I would point out is that there are some items that, well, the wastewater budget is a separate budget outside of the cap. That was begun, that shift outside the cap was begun when Alderman T-Boom was in office and was completed last year, and that's what part of the lawsuit was about. That begins on page 276. Paving is also not part of the budget. That was taken out of the combined annual municipal budget or out of the cap two fiscal years ago, I think, 3 fiscal years ago. 3 fiscal years ago, and that is on page 297 in the pink pages. Anyway, I wanted to give you kind of an overview of what I was doing, what I was thinking, so that you would have some more context and background as you begin to hear from the various departments as to what they disagree with or what they would like to do, and as you get more deeply into considering the details of the budget. And of course, what?
I was gonna say,
Any questions? I mean, I'm
when
here.
you're done, are you willing to entertain questions?
Yeah, of course, yes.
Alderman Jennings?
So I heard you say that, I think you said that we started out with a 2.88% increase, and then you want to keep it at 2.5%, but then I heard you say 1.6%. What's 1.6%?
All right, the 288 is what the taxes went up in last year. That's the tax rate increase that we saw last year. 1.6% is the amount that the budget is up over the budget that was passed last year. So this budget represents a 1.6% increase over the budget that was passed last year. A little bit of a refinement is that there were some supplemental appropriations last year, and if you put those in the base, the budget is up only 1.3%. But however you look at it, it's at the most 1.6. But the amount of the budget does not automatically translate into the tax rate increase, because at the end of the year, for decades, the city has always used some of the surplus generated at the end of the year to help offset the tax rate. So if in year one, you use $5 million to offset the tax rate, and in year two, you also use $5 million to offset the tax rate, that is tax neutral. On the other hand, if in one year you use $5 million to offset the tax rate, and the next year you only use 3, taxes go up $2 million, even though before you even get to the budget. So one thing we needed to be very careful with in terms of the fact that we we used 7.1 million last year against the tax rate because of all these fixed costs that went up very, very significantly. We probably can't do that again. So, we want to make sure the taxes don't go up too much in the current year, at least as a result of the budget. So the budget is tight because we know we won't have the same amount to apply to the tax rate as we did last year. I don't know if that's clear, but I could try again if it wasn't.
Alderman Jettie?
Excuse me, in all honesty, it's not yet clear to me, but I don't want to, if I'm having trouble understanding it, I don't want to take up everyone else's time if they understand it, but.
Any other questions for the mayor? Alderman O'Brien?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Mayor, I think we're very prudently going down the correct course. I understand because of the reevaluation, and it seems like the citizens of Nashua really got to realize a lot of things, such as the pension and the reevaluation, are completely out of our control. This just comes right in on the proverbial lap here, so it has nothing to do with us chopping pencils on the budget. But I'm concerned with the fire department because other things that are out of our control does not alleviate the call volumes and everything that seems at the fire department. Are you kind of have something in your back pocket? I don't want to tip your hand or anything else like that. But once we let the dust settles with the reevaluation and everything, can we take another look at that in the future, contingency-wise, and look at that if there is a legitimate problem? Because I fear that no division head's going to come in here, increase personnel. They have a complete understanding, unless there really is that need. So I am concerned about that.
Yes, Mayor?
Well, of course, in the future, we can look at that. I mean, the fire department makes the case that, the call volume, as you say, is way up from what it used to be. And that they need, ideally, they should have more dispatchers. Now, my question to them, and I believe there were 4 proposed, which would provide even coverage all the time. My question to them was, of course, it's incremental. Well, what if we did 1? And then try to do something next year? I mean, we sort of ease into it, right? Given all these, because we got we got needs everywhere. And their answer was, and I'm not sure I'm totally convinced, but their answer is no. It's too hard to deal with just 1. Having help on some shifts but not others, so it has to be all or nothing. So I might have done 1. I might have proposed 1 and thought, well, maybe we could get another couple next year, something like that. But with the all or nothing question, I mean, given what we're facing, to me the answer was nothing.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Alderman McCarthy?
Yeah, I guess I can understand the concerns about the department, but with the same concern in the police department, the $900,000 in the school department is coming from something we probably wanted to have, and it's just, this is not a year when we can afford not to be completely frugal because of the reval. I wanted to point out that when we talk about the effects of percentage increases, and this goes back to Alderman Jettie's question, normally in a year when we're not doing the reval, when we say a tax rate increase of 1.8%, that means an increase in the average tax bill of 1.8% as well. That's not the case this year. In all likelihood, the tax rate for 2018 will be lower than it was in 2017, but bills will be up because of the reval.
Correct.
Any other questions?
I mean, can I mention one other thing?
Yes, go ahead, Mayor.
One area that we used to try to keep the budget down to 1.6% is the capital equipment reserve fund, which is where we buy equipment. Now, we had deferred last year $1.2 million of purchases that were in the list for the year, but money remained attached to those and remained in the account. So I authorized them to go ahead with all that. The money was appropriated. But this year, I think but I think we have 700,000 or something like that left in the account. I appropriated, or I proposed in the budget, appropriating $1 million, which we got to by kind of deciding what equipment was absolutely necessary. And so we are making, the budget proposes that we purchase about $1.7 million of equipment. Now, should we do more than that? Ideally, I mean, we can't get away with doing $1.7 million every year because the condition of the equipment, and we're talking, plow trucks and dump trucks and vehicles all across the city, will decline. I mean, this is a 1 year where we're only going to buy 1.7 million, but we need to do more than that typically. But because of the issues we're facing, because last year we were able to do some fairly significant purchases, I felt that we could get by with this 1.7 million. Now, one way we can correct that is that at the end of the year, we typically get a surplus, which is comprised of two main elements. First, unexpended appropriations. And in the last few years, those have typically been in the neighborhood of $1 million to $1.5 million, somewhere in that neighborhood. Hopefully we'll get that again, meaning money that was budgeted but not spent by the end of the year. And we have revenues which exceed the projected amounts. And that mostly comes in the area of automobile registrations, but not all in that area. What we've done in the past, 2 years ago, to help with SURF, we used the unexpended appropriations to and funneled that into the SURF account to bolster the balance in the account so that the following year we'd be able to purchase more equipment. And I believe we did 700,000, 750, something like that, 2 years ago. That might be a high priority in terms of dealing with, and that's called the escrow process. That might be where we want to send escrowed money, unappropriated money, or most of it, into the SURF account because of the need to maintain equipment quality in providing reasonable services to the citizens. When there was a day, decades ago, when the city had trouble plowing the streets because the equipment was so broken down, and we never want to get to that point again.
Alderman McCarthy?
Yeah, question about the assessments. I think the date for when we set taxation just passed. What of, for example, the Renaissance property, the Brady Sullivan property, and anything that's happening with the Flatley property at Exit 1, how much of that is not yet on the tax rolls?
Well, of course, what they have to do is, with respect to any property that is in construction, they determine the value as of April 1, as you just suggested. So with respect to Renaissance, I think it's virtually finished, so almost the entire value will go into the tax base for yesterday. With respect to Brady Sullivan and Franklin Street, it's mostly done, but not completely, so it has to be evaluated as of its condition, its rate of, its percentage of completion. So probably most of it will go in. A little bit of it went in last year. And the third property you asked about was, I forget what.
Flatly.
Flatly. Well, it will, whatever has been built will go into the tax base, and what hasn't been built won't.
Follow up?
Yeah, the reason I ask is, those will actually have a substantial impact on the available revenue. If we add 400 units that are valued at 120,000 apiece, that adds almost $1 million at the current tax rate to the revenue picture. So one would expect, and I don't know how much of that we've already taken into account with the 1.6 number in the budget, but one would expect that next year will be a lot better year because of no reval and because of bringing additional inventory online.
That could be. I mean, we do factored into those projections I was giving you. I think we factored in $40 million of increase, but then scaled it back a little bit to be more conservative. $40 million increase, but we tend to lose value at times as well. I mean, in the sense that, there's a bill in the legislature to reduce legislative assessments. Bill in the legislature to reduce utility assessments. If that happens, we lose, $1 million. Sometimes we expand a veterans tax credit. We lose some value there. So there are ways that we lose value that, reduce the effect of some of these increases. But a big project that maybe will add, that will add some value is BAE did a big improvement down the south end. That should add something. I think it was much of it was internal, but still a lot of money went into that building. So that should add something. And, there are different things going around the cities. But in the projections that we made, we assumed some amount of increase in the base pre-reval.
Alderman McCarthy?
Yeah, I guess I would just, with regard to the utility assessments, I would remind the public to keep an eye on that, and that voting for a decrease in the value of the utilities is equivalent to voting for $1 million increase in local property taxes.
Correct. So the members of the legislature that are here, I would remind them of that.
Duly noted. by me.
When the utilities are out there lobbying for this, and they've been doing this for years and years and years, they never quite explain that for every dollar you reduce their assessment or their taxes through reduced assessment, you're raising someone else's taxes, probably someone's home, by $1. And the idea that the utilities can go kind of around the normal process and go directly to the legislature to get a property tax cut, that's not an avenue that the average citizen has. And therefore, I think the utilities should be dealt with the same way everybody else is. If they contest it, file an abatement request.
Alderwoman Kelly?
Thank you. Mr. Mayor, I know that you were very versed in the differences in the budget for police and fire, but you didn't really get into school. Do you know where that increase is coming from in terms of what they're looking to do beyond your 2.5%?
Well, I think there are a whole number of things. Now, I haven't gotten into that with you as much because we do not have line item control over the school department. So what, we can suggest, or we might have an idea, or you don't need this or that, but in the end, all we have is bottom line control, and then they decide how to deal with the budget, and they don't have to, we say, well, we think you can do without this. They might disagree, and they spend the money on that anyway. But there are, if you talk, it's more complicated because there are many different things in the budget. When Dr. Mosley and the department comes in, I think you can go through those details, but it involves teachers and paras and grant writer, things like that, a lot of different things.
Follow up, Alderwoman Kelly?
It's another question.
Custodians, more custodians.
I wanted to know also if we're considering a contingency if this lawsuit appeal goes through.
If the what?
The lawsuit appeal that is going to the Supreme Court?
Well, I don't think the appeal is going to, for those who are pursuing the appeal, is really going to get them very much, in the sense that by the time the Supreme Court, but you should talk to Steve Bolton about this, because although I used to be a lawyer, I do not practice law now, and I never did municipal law, but I'm on inactive status, so to speak. By the time, we're fighting over the wastewater change that was made in fiscal 18, at the beginning of fiscal, or at the end of fiscal 17. By the time that gets, if the appeal were successful, by the time that gets decided, we're going to be 2-3 years down the road. And in addition, a potential outcome, even if the city were not to be successful, would be a remand, meaning back to the Superior Court, because the ruling was that they didn't have standing. Well, what if the Supreme Court says, well, they did, but there's no decision on the merits? Mm-hmm. So, okay, send it back. Now decide the case. So, this, and then that gets appealed. This thing can go on forever. I think the court made the right decision. I think in the end, we'll just have, if something were to go wrong with the lawsuit, I don't think it's realistic to cut $20 million out of the budget or something like that, 10 million or whatever they're seeking, lay off everybody. In the end, we just have to deal with it. But so far, I think, I think the court made the right decision, and probably the Supreme Court will do the same.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Alderman Jettie?
Getting back to the school budget. So we just approved new contracts. One of the issues going into the last election was whether or not the teachers had received appropriate compensation over the years, and so they renegotiated their contracts, and hopefully that corrected the situation. But we've committed ourselves to paying more in teacher salaries, and I think that's money well spent. But I don't remember what the percentage increase is, but if the teachers' salaries are going up, we've got to pay those. How can we reduce the budget? Where do you see areas that they're going to be able to cut in order to meet the request to lower their budget?
Now, I think they will tell you that 2.5% gets them to a point where they can maintain current services and fund the teacher's contract without any significant reductions in services. Now, Dr. Mosley is attempting to, laudably, to improve services, and by more people, and for example, I think there are 4 more custodians in this than we have now in the budget, as an example. But I think he'll tell you that, you know, that 2.5 will get him to the point where he can maintain what we have, pay for the teacher's contract without significant, without you know, laying off teachers or reducing personnel or anything like that. And that's sort of what I tried to arrive at in terms of, given all the forces and the factors that we've discussed, I wanted to try to propose something that would not harm or reduce education, but at the same time would keep taxes as low as we can under the circumstances. I mean, their first maintenance budget, remember, came in at 2.1. Now, there was some issues there because they had underestimated custodial expenses and assumed that there might be privatization, which you know, obviously never did occur and will not. So I think 2.5 kind of is their maintenance budget.
Follow up?
That
Alderman Jones?
2.1 was before the contracts were negotiated, wasn't it?
Yeah, but I think they were, the increase is 3. They were, that is true, but they built that, the ultimate settlement was pretty close. Well, in year 1 was basically the same as the contract that was rejected by the teachers. The improvement, the adjustments occurred in years 2 and 3 and 4. I mean, the year 1 remained about the same as when they settled the first time, and the improvements came enough to gain the support of the teachers in the out years. And I think that's what Dr. Mosley will tell you.
Any other questions? Just to reiterate on the school department, with any of the other departments, you can make a recommendation to cut a line item. In the school department, the only thing you do is cut the bottom line, because in the end, as soon as the budget's approved, hopefully before July, we give them an amount of money, and then they sit down and they rebudget, and they can spend it differently than what they presented to us, because that's in their control. So just wanted to let you know. So we have no way to say, okay, hire 2 less custodians. It's not going to mean anything. If we cut their budget or add to their budget, it's to the bottom line.
Of course, you know, the Board of Aldermen is a separate branch of government. And I am telling you what I proposed and why. You have to use your own judgment. It's not, I mean, I still think what I did was the right thing, but, you know, certainly a lot of the things that are requested by the departments would be nice to have. So, you know, so in the end, you know, you have to use your own judgment. Maybe you cut the budget, or maybe you change it, maybe you increase it. I don't know. I mean, it is up to you. So I'm not trying to, I'm just telling you what I did and why. That's all.
All set? Just one last question. The state promised us $300,000+ for kindergarten, raising money through Keno. Are we going to expect that next year?
Well, they pay a year behind. Yeah, I think we'll probably get it. They pay a year behind. I think we'll get it for the current school year sometime after July 1, maybe in the fall. And it is more than 300,000, but and so maybe it will help us with revenue a little bit. But remember this, let's say it's 700,000. Our stabilization grant is reduced by 400,000 every year. So even though that's going up, stabilization grant is going down. So in the end, over 2 years, you know, it won't do, it's a wash, and in year three, we're behind. So, this stabilization, I mean, these are various things that go on with the downshifting and the like. The stabilization grant is like $4 million and is being reduced about, that's part of the total school package, but it's being reduced by 400,000 a year. So, you know, if we get 7 out of kindergarten, we lose 4. I mean, in the context of 260 million, that 300,000 is not a big factor.
Alderman Jettie?
It makes me need to ask, what is the stabilization grant? What is that?
All right, well, there's the school formula is very complex, and I understand it, I think, but it's best to always sit down with someone and go over it again who's really knowledgeable. Like there's a guy named Dan Vallone who's with Rise Up New Hampshire, is extremely knowledgeable about this stuff, as is Dan Donovan over at the school department. There's the adequacy grant, which is $3,600 per student based upon average attendance for the prior year. But and then there's some aid that's targeted, and it's not very much, but some aid that's targeted to students with disabilities, special ed, things like that. But there was a time, about 10 years ago, when the legislative formula was more focused on communities and schools particularly, where there was a high free and reduced lunch population. And in that formula, certain communities such as Nashua and Manchester did better because our free and reduced lunch population is 43% or whatever. Manchester's 60%. And there are communities like Wyndham and Bedford where it's 5% or less. Wyndham, I think, is 3%, Bedford 5%, something like that. Well, things got changed. And so now aid is being shifted. And Dover sued, different things happened. Aid is being shifted to communities that are much more affluent and where they've had a rising school population. So, for example, for this current year, Nashua's aid through the stabilization grant went down 400,000. Aid to Wyndham and Bedford nearly doubled. I think it was up 90 and 95% in 1 year. Now, again, Wyndham and Bedford are among the most affluent communities in New Hampshire, but their aid is going up rapidly. Ours is declining. They have virtually no free and reduced lunch kids. The reason that there was previously a focus, and many educational experts would suggest that there should be a focus on free and reduced lunch statistics and numbers, because on average, not every family, not every kid, but on average, a kid who is, a free and reduced lunch, in other words, from a economically disadvantaged family, comes to school less prepared, on average, than someone who's not in that category. And many of the kids who have, families who are not making a lot of money, maybe working 3 jobs, maybe have other issues, they don't get read to in the summertime as much. They lose more during the summertime than, where the parents are always reading every night, stuff like that. So they kind of they start out behind, they take a step back during the summer. So there should be more attention to those children. And that was the point. When Joe Foster was in the Senate, Maggie Hassan was in the Senate, and someone from the Seacoast, they were very helpful to those communities that, like ours, that have higher free and reduced lunch populations. And then somehow in the years after that, this got changed, and most of the increased money now is going to the rich towns. As ridiculous as that seems from the perspective of Nashua or Manchester.
All set. Thank you, Mayor, for coming in and.
Thank
giving us
you.
the
Anytime
guidance.
you have questions, just have me come back. I'll, if you want my perspective or thoughts on anything, just let me know.
Thank you.
All right, bye-bye.
Okay. The budgets that we'll be discussing tonight, information technology, the IT division. Would you like to come up, introduce yourself, and give us an overview of your division, and then address your budget?
Well, thanks for having me, and my name, for the record, is Bruce Cognon. I'm the Director of the Information Technology Division, and let me get this set up, and I will show you, give a little bit of a background on the Information Technology Division. Our division is comprised of information technology as well as Nashua's cable TV, which hosts the public, government, and education channels. Give a little background first on information technology. We have 3 teams in that particular group. One team is infrastructure, technical support, and the third team is applications development and project management. On the technical support team, there's 3 full-time staff members, 1 IT manager, and 2 technical support specialists. They're responsible for the hardware in 34 locations, software, 240 various applications. They're responsible for the telecom system, and they also provide help desk services at the first level. Help desk services, when you call 3320, they are the group that answers that phone. On the infrastructure team, we have 4 full-time staff members, an IT manager, a network admin, a systems admin, and a database administrator. They basically handle all the servers. There's roughly 140 virtualized servers, 70 network connected devices, 7 different wireless networks, storage where we have roughly 160 terabyte of storage. They provide second level support. We also have 45 miles of fiber throughout the city. They're responsible for all the endpoints within that fiber. And that includes all the traffic cabinets as well. They go out if there's a break in the fiber at any of the traffic cabinets. And that's a critical part. The third group in the information technology department is application development and the project management team. In there is 4 full-time staff members, an IT manager, an implementation specialist, an applications analyst, and we also have the web administrator and graphic designer, who is also a part-time employee, only 32 hours a week. They're responsible for all the implementations, the software projects, any sort of development that has to take place, whether it be interfaces or reports that have to be done, any changes to the website, and they also provide a third-level support. Within this particular department, the majority of the items in the department are contractual, meaning that we have software maintenance. We have over 100 different vendors that we pay software maintenance to, and they're all under contract. So we're at a fixed rate with them. We can't change that. Hardware maintenance, we also have the same contracts, but fortunately, we're able to do some hardware consolidation and reduce that amount, what we're paying out for that. The technology operations is, we have the Lawson ERP application. We have a company that does remote managed services for that. We have knowledgeable people that know the Lawson application, but they are not Lawson specialists. So we have a company that assists us remotely with Lawson. And that's also one that's under contractual. So in order to meet the budget, we're deferring some of the hardware upgrades that we have to do. My team has been very good about reducing the costs over the years of hardware upgrades, specifically in the desktop area. They've been implementing SSD drives on PCs instead of doing upgrades. We have a lot of PCs that we've been able to extend the life of them 8 or even 10 years old. So the aging architecture is out there, but we've been able to implement hardware changes to make them transparent to the user that they are old and they actually still perform. But at some point, we are going to have to replace them. And the same thing with computer software. It goes hand in hand. We're going to defer some of the upgrades that need to take place. The other part of the division is Nashua Cable TV, which is the public, government, and education channels. There's 2 full-time employees on the government and education side that manage the broadcasts, and we have 9 part-time videographers, one of which obviously is filming right now. And then the public access channel is handled by Access Nashua under a separate contract and a separate group of people. I won't go into too much detail, but Nashua Government TV obviously handles all the government meetings, as well as some of the external type things that need to take place, like the mayor's State of the City address and things like that. The broadcasts are streamed live over the internet. They could be found on Channel 16, as well as on the website. Rebroadcasts can be on demand through the website, or we also have a YouTube channel where they can be viewed as well the next day. And then same thing with education. We have the videographers that handle the live broadcasts of those, as well as the sporting events and other things within the education area. And then Access Nashua is handled through the public channel is handled through Access Nashua, and they also have a separate website that has the rebroadcasts.
You want to wait till the end or no?
It's just that I have a question about the educational
Yeah.
channel. We don't archive those?
The videos, they're all
Yeah.
saved.
They are?
They are saved.
Okay. I just noticed in the Board of Ed budget minutes from last week, they were debating buying a server to archive the Board of Ed videos on, which would seem unnecessary.
Yeah, they seem that because usually when they videotape them, they're saved. We used to have a separate place where we saved them, and now they're saving them up on YouTube.
Could you follow up with them to
Yep.
make sure that they know that they are actually being saved?
Yeah. I'll get an answer for you.
How do you access those through YouTube?
I believe education can get through YouTube as well. I'll have to verify that. I know government is. We used to have a separate site that we had that really didn't work that well, but that's where everything was archived before. Okay.
Yep.
So the PEG channel, the cable TV, is basically an autonomous type fund. It's a fund that is funded through the franchise agreement with Comcast. We have a franchise fee negotiated with Comcast of 4%. 2.7% of that franchise fee goes to the city's general fund. 1.3% is transferred to the PEG account to operate the cable TV for public education and government channels. There's a chart that roughly shows the changes to that. However, it's a confined account, so if there's money left over, it automatically rolls over and gets into available to do capital improvement. So if we need to do upgrades, we're gonna have to do upgrades in the chamber here when we get to high def we'll have to replace all the cameras and things like that. So the money accumulates. We have to replace cameras within the studio. That money keeps accumulating. We get roughly 120,000 per quarter into that account. So it's roughly $480,000 a year that accumulates, and then the operating budget comes out of that money there. Nothing comes out of the actual city account. And that's pretty much it. That's a brief highlight of the overall department.
Questions? Alderman McCarthy.
Just curious on the HD recordings. When we upgrade the equipment to be able to do those, is Comcast ready to put us on an HD channel?
We're really waiting for them. The auditorium upstairs, when we did the upgrades up there, we already did that in high def. We'll have to make some changes on the education side. The switcher has to be upgraded. We'll have to upgrade the cameras within the chamber here. We do have the money to do that. We're just waiting for Comcast to make that available to us.
When they provide us with an HD channel, would they also continue to supply it on the in the non-HD tier?
I would imagine so, yeah. Yeah. Otherwise, it'd be.
I try not to imagine things
Yeah.
with Comcast.
Other questions? I have a question. The school department, I've heard that the kids now are taking all these standardized tests on computers, and they have numerous problems because of speed, hanging up. It may even be the servers that are causing a problem. How closely, I know the IT, they have their own IT department, but
Right.
you guys are pretty closely aligned, right?
Well, we partner with them for a variety of things. So my team's responsible for all the enterprise-type applications, Kronos, Telestaff, the ERP, Lawson, and such. We also work closely with them on the fiber because it obviously connects all the schools, and they work with us as well. But we don't really have a lot of involvement with their servers or their internal network infrastructure.
Okay.
When we did the telecom upgrade throughout the city, we worked very closely with them because that's something that is consistent and common throughout the entire city now.
Okay, good. Alderman Jettie, did you have a question?
I did, but you've made me want to ask something else. So as far as, I hear of that, students in the high school, for example, I've heard complaints that they can't get, their tablets, an appropriate tablet, but that has nothing to do with you.
Right, we don't handle the schools, the internal schools, right?
Okay.
The other separate IT staff.
You'll get a shot at them when they come in.
Okay. And could I ask another?
Yes, follow up?
And so, if I understand you correctly, the money that is used for the television part of your department
Right,
is money that's provided by Comcast?
correct.
Part of that franchise fee?
Yep.
And that's pretty much in stone, that can't change until the franchise is
Until we do another
renegotiated.
franchise agreement, right.
Okay.
Yep.
And so, right now, the money that they get, or that you get from them, pays for all of the expenses associated with the
Pays for all
television.
the expenses and also has money left over, which accumulates, that eventually goes towards capital improvements. So roughly, I think right now, and you're obviously, on the CTAP committee, we have $687,000 in the bank, ready for capital improvements.
And besides, could I follow up?
Mm-hmm.
And besides paying for the expenses of the television part of your
Right.
department, the franchise fee also pays, did I see 2.7% to the
2.7.
city?
Goes to the city's general fund, right?
Thank you.
All set? I had Alderman Schmidt and then Alderman McCarthy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Can you tell us a little bit about cybersecurity and how you handle that?
There's quite a few things that we do. We just upgraded our firewall. Cybersecurity is one of those good and bad things. It also causes lots of pain points because, you know, we whitelist or blacklist or gray list a lot of sites that are legitimate. But we have to because they're on a list. The MSISAC, which is part of Homeland Security, I get on monthly calls. I'm also part of InfraGuard, which is part of the FBI. I'm on the New Hampshire's Cybersecurity Subcommittee for the state of New Hampshire. So we have a lot of various points where we get information. We've done a lot internally, the way we handle our desktops. We can control, if somebody does get a localized virus, we can easily control where that goes based upon how we have the system set up. You know, so my concern, I'm very much concerned with cybersecurity, and I'm also, I'm not concerned about people stealing information because the right to know law, they can get probably the majority of the information we have. I'm concerned about destruction of information or defacing of information, and that's one of my biggest concerns. You know, so we're constantly looking at how do we not impact our users, but also allow us to protect that information. We publish a monthly newsletter to all users and you know, explain a lot, not just about cybersecurity within the city, but in their own personal lives. You know, how to detect you know, various phishing scams on your own email, how to detect whether or not someone has put a device on an ATM to try and skim your credit card. Other types of scams to look for when people are either making phone calls to you or doing mailings. There's so many different kinds of scams out there. So we send out a monthly newsletter to everybody. We also publish it on the website for the citizens for their own edification. We'd like to make that information available to everybody and educate people on cybersecurity.
Wonderful.
Um,
Thank you.
Alderman McCarthy?
Yeah, I wanted to go back to the franchise fee for a minute.
Yeah.
So when you, just for the education of the board members, when we look at the 2.7% that goes to the general fund, the reason for that is the equivalent of property taxes on the cable company. They have 350 miles of fiber in the city that they don't otherwise pay any tax for the benefit of doing business in the city. Their fiber is strung on PSNH and you know, the phone company's poles, but is not directly assessed. So that goes into the general fund to pay for general expenses. The 1.3 was what we negotiated to pay for the education and government channels. But I want to stress that if we increase that franchise fee, that doesn't come out of Comcast's profits. That is a direct pass-through. If we raise the franchise fee, you go by $1, everybody's cable bill goes up the next month by $1 also.
Any other questions? Do the aldermen get a copy of that newsletter? Since we all have city
If you're on the
computers?
city account, I believe you should be getting it because it goes out to all city users.
Does it?
I'll make
Does
sure
it?
it's not.
I don't think I've ever seen one.
All right, I'll make sure it gets out to,
Okay.
get that there as well. But it is also on the city's website under the Information Technology Division.
Yeah. Alderman McCarthy?
Yeah, on any of the remote access stuff that we have, are we doing multi-factor authentication on that?
Not at this point, no, but we're looking at doing that. You know, that's an important criteria.
Other questions? Seeing none, thank you very much.
All right, thank you.
Have a good day. Okay. Alderman O'Brien.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would like to make a motion to table R 18019.
Okay, a motion on the floor is to table R 18019 until the next budget meeting, which, by the way, is Thursday. And it's the police department, and you were all given, actually vote on it first. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. On your desk, you got a copy of the book from the police department. It was also part of the agenda for Thursday's meeting, but I'm sure you didn't want to print out 137 pages, so it's easier to look in the binder. I did ask them to give us this information ahead, because in past years, they gave it to us the night that they came in, and there's a lot of information in there to look at. So I would ask that you all take a look at that data, and it may drive questions of the police department. Okay. Alderman O'Brien, anything else?
This general discussion, Mr. Chair.
General discussion. Any generals? Public comment? I don't think so. There's nobody here. Remarks to the alderman? Nope. We don't have any need for non-public. Do I hear a motion?
Motion to adjourn.
Alderman Wiltshire made a motion to adjourn. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? We're adjourned at 8:11.